Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where in the world you're tuning in from. I'm thrilled to be spending the next 30 minutes with you. My name is Ashley Rose. I am the owner and clinical director of Mission Cognition Social Emotional Learning Program. I have been working in the fields of special education and applied behavior analysis for about 23 years now. And I have been running our specialized social behavior emotional regulation support clinic for the past 13 years. So I'm thrilled to have this time with you to share some information that I think is really critical. And when planning for a short session such as this, it really encouraged me to pull out what I thought some of the key takeaway points were to cover a topic that could potentially be so broad and so comprehensive. So, my hope is for each of you to have something as a strong takeaway that is very applicable to your life and your world as a parent or as a professional. So, let's jump into social skills and neurodiversity affirming practices. So, what I would really like to do with our time today is explore how to support social connection in ways that are actually meaningful, respectful, while also affirming differences. Some of the things that I have found over the years in observing social skills programs or social skills groups is some of the targets can look quite rote or a bit robotic, and teaching skills that make the learner appear as if they have social skills, things like focusing heavily on greetings or saying my turn, your turn in a game, which aren't always the most natural and aren't always the most functional, meaningful, and relevant goals for that individual learner. So that's really something that we want to spend time thinking critically about. All of our decisions when we are supporting our learners should be tied to what is going to improve their quality of life, what's going to be a best fit for them as an individual human being, not based solely on just a specific diagnosis. So, what are social skills? Very broad, very complex, but to simplify it here, we're really looking at the ways that we connect, communicate, and build relationships. And I like to talk about even the ways we connect, communicate, and build relationships with ourselves. I have many learners that have a difficult time with self-regulation skills, identifying how their body is feeling in certain situations, then being able to express that to others, being able to talk positively to themselves when they potentially make a mistake or something doesn't go quite right. So it's also the way that we are interacting with ourselves, in addition to maybe the more traditional definition of how we're interacting with the social world. And what I really want to emphasize is that connection piece. Everybody deserves to have positive, meaningful, reciprocal relationships in their lives, regardless of any type of disability. We have loads of examples of potential social domains or social areas that could be targeted. I put up a couple examples for you here. Some of these you may look at and say, well, these are really higher level skills. But I want to be very, very clear that social skills support or targeting social behavior is very appropriate for all learners, regardless of age, regardless of developmental level. As human beings, we were created to connect with one another. As soon as a baby is born, they're crying to connect with their caregiver to communicate their wants and needs. So that's something that we really want to work to foster and develop from the earliest ages. Some early social behaviors are things like orienting toward a caregiver's face. So just looking at the facial expression, starting to play games like peekaboo. Row your boat is a common game that we play here, starting to get that back and forth and that embedded turn taking through playful interactions. So it seems like something that you might just playfully do kind of without thinking and not realizing how valuable that is in terms of making those social connections and starting to develop some of those social behaviors. I have a toddler who's starting to babble now, and I'm copy sounds that he makes, and he's starting to say them more because my attention is valuable. So we're building that social connection through my imitation of his actions. So that's another great go-to strategy. So some of the domains that I have listed here are things like cooperative play. So being able to work together toward a shared common goal. So perhaps the children are stacking blocks in a shared tower. Or in a pretend situation, they've decided they would like to play store. And someone says, I'll be the shopkeeper, I'll be the cashier, I'll be the shopper. So working together toward that shared goal where everybody has a job or a role on that team. What I want to specify here is even though I'm giving examples of things the children could say, our kids who are non-speakers, who do not have speech, can absolutely play at the social level when they're developmentally ready without speech. I watch children play cooperatively together all the time without ever speaking to one another. They could hand things to each other, they can accept things. So if I take that first example of a block tower, they can absolutely work together to build a block tower, even build a whole city without ever using speech to communicate those ideas. So we really want to be cautious and not sell our non-speaking children short, if you will. So what we want to do is meet them developmentally where they're at and making sure that we're giving all of our learners the same opportunities for that enriched social environment. We can move into goals in terms of conversation. So, initiating a conversation. How do you maintain a conversation? How do you keep it going? Things like asking questions, making comments, getting a back and forth. And again, this is going to look very different dependent upon where that learner is developmentally. But here, with all things, we want that reciprocity, that back and forth in the social exchange. The next example is with nonverbal communication. There's so much information, social information that we convey from our body language, our facial expressions, our tone of voice. It's not just what we say, it's also how we say it. So our learners who are not tuning in, and I'm not specifically referring to eye contact, but who are not tuning into the face and orienting toward their social partners are likely to miss a lot of important contextual social information, which may down the line lead to more deficits in terms of language development. So, one thing I really encourage people to do is be very playful, especially with our young early learners, your learners of any age who have more emerging language, is really try to be exaggerated with your expressions and playing games and doing activities that encourages them to look toward you. You can play no talking games where you're giving directions by just pointing, or you're nodding a yes for something or a no and building a lot of anticipation. All of those are great examples of, again, fun, playful ways where you can increase motivation for that learner to look toward you to your face. And again, I want to make the distinction between eye contact. I am not looking to specifically target eye contact, that learner looking in my eyes. And we'll talk about that in terms of neurodiversity affirming practices and why that's something I don't specifically target. But it is important that we are getting that orientation toward the face, toward the body language, again, to pick up on some of that social information that's being communicated non-verbally. Perspective taking, certainly a much higher level skill set here. Our kids who have difficulty with perspective taking tend to experience more conflict in play, and have a harder time resolving that conflict. Kids who may be rigid in their thinking of, my way or no way, but I believe that this happened, so it must have happened this way. There's really no room for like a gray area or interpretation. So working through the conflict resolution steps can be much more difficult for our learners who are benefiting from supports in skill building in this area of perspective taking and some of that flexible thinking. So that ties right into that next one, problem solving and negotiation. To be able to compromise, really have to be flexible, recognizing that you are not going to get exactly what you wanted, but you're going to get a piece of it. And the other person's going to get a piece of exactly what they wanted as well, finding that compromise. I'd really like to strongly asterisk, underline, highlight, bold self-advocacy. Self-advocacy sounds like a much higher level or advanced skill set, but all of our learners, regardless of age, regardless of disability, are working on self-advocacy skills. This includes even our 3-year-olds who have very restricted language, maybe are not yet able to communicate their wants and needs. That's what self-advocacy looks like for them. Just starting off with them being able to shake their head no, say no on their iPad, their speech generating device, push something away. We need to make sure that our learners can communicate what they want and what they don't want, because I will guarantee to you that they will communicate to us what they don't want through other types of behavior if we don't teach them how to effectively do that. So things like running off or crying or yelling or dropping to the floor or hitting, that's not comfortable for anyone. So self-advocacy is a really critical piece for all of your learners, your children's programming plans. We chatted a bit about flexibility, the importance of staying regulated and being comfortable in your own body. As things pop up that are potentially upsetting or undesirable, being able to stay safe. As adults, it is potentially our biggest and I would say most difficult job to co-regulate with our children. They don't yet have the skills to regulate themselves, so they're counting on us. We have to model that for them. So we talk about like being the calm in the storm. The more escalated your child is, the calmer you want to be. And it's so easy for me to say it in a presentation, but it's very difficult to do in practice. And I want to acknowledge that. And nobody's perfect at it, but if it's something you prioritize and you say, this is something that I really want to focus on, I really want to do it more consistently, you're already doing a wonderful, wonderful job. So staying calm, staying safe, holding space for them when they're having those really big feelings. And then of course, things at the bottom here, we want to make sure that our learners are able to initiate interactions when they're motivated to do so. And again, they can join in. So whether this is in play or whether this is in conversation. When we are talking about neurodiversity affirming practices, and I'm going to talk specifically about social skills, but really for any potential domain. Not every goal is appropriate for every learner. So there are many different types of assessment or curricula tools that are available. We want to be very systematic and thoughtful about the way we are selecting goals. So here's some criteria that I follow and I encourage others to be very mindful of. I want to make sure that we are selecting goals that are developmentally appropriate. We're meeting the learner where they are at developmentally, not based on their age. Is it functional for this learner? Are these skills that we're focusing on going to actually show up in their day-to-day lives? Is this going to result in meaningful change? We're looking to improve quality of life. We don't want to just check a box and mark something off that it was mastered. We want to make sure that it really is going to help this learner to feel more comfortable in the world, to express themselves more effectively, to connect with others and build those social relationships. So we're looking at big life-changing things here. And again, of course, relevant to this specific individual, not just because this is an 8-year-old with an autism diagnosis, so we should be working on this. None of that. We don't want any rote goal selection. We want to absolutely ensure that you have been very, very thoughtful about what you've picked and why. Be able to give the rationale of why you selected this goal for this specific learner. And absolutely include them in the process. For your learners who have more language and can have conversation with you, ask them about the things they want to work on. And for your learners who have more emerging language that are not able to have those types of conversations, observe them. Watch how they're interacting with the world. What's frustrating for them? What's upsetting for them? What are they trying to achieve? And how can you come in as their teammate and their support person to focus on skill building in those areas to help them live the life and do the things that they are wanting to do? And as a human being, are entitled to have the right to do. So, some additional considerations here, a few of which I've already mentioned, but just to summarize, we want to avoid any type of checkbox teaching. So, going through a list, picking this, because they come in a certain order in a book that you purchased, and checking things off mastered, mastered, mastered. I often talk about language development and targets there. I've seen over the years so many goals where it's something like, learner will label 150 pictures, or learner will give animal sounds. Those types of goals are only relevant, functional, and meaningful if the learner can talk to somebody about those things. So, if we focus on teaching the learner to label these 100 things, does that mean that when they're out in the community and they see one of those things of interest, can they point it out to you and label it? If they can't, that language is not being used socially, and I would question how functional, meaningful, and relevant targets like that are. So you always want to be thinking ahead. What's the plan? So from the first step of, is this functional, meaningful, and relevant? And then thinking all the way through, how will this show up for the learner in the day-to-day life? How will this help them to communicate their wants and needs better? How will this help them to be more connected to the social world? We discussed developmentally appropriate selections, developmentally appropriate practices. We want to make sure that we're matching their current stage, not just their age. So I gave an example in an earlier slide of cooperative play. In neurotypical development, we see cooperative play around 3.5, 4 years old. If I have a learner come in who is 7 years of age, I'm not immediately jumping to goals focused on cooperative play unless I see they have some other prerequisite skills. If it's a 7-year-old learner who is coming in and I observe that they're primarily interacting with their environment for the sensory experience or the sensory value of it. So maybe a lot of tactile things or touching a lot of things. Maybe I see them spinning things or watching and looking at things drop, some cause and effect. That's giving me a lot of information about their sensory preferences, how they're exploring their world, how they're how we would say contacting reinforcement. That tells me, hey, this is where I can meet them where they're at. I'm going to join in this type of play. I'm going to enrich the environment, and we're going to see if I can bring in some other toys or activities that give them the same type of input. But it would not be developmentally appropriate for me to jump to cooperative play, which requires a pretty high level of structure, back and forth, and reciprocity with a peer. If that learner is showing no interest, no observable interest or acknowledgement of peers yet. So meeting them where they're at. Again, I'm going to heavily emphasize make it functional. Will this skill show up for them at home? Will this skill show up for them at school, in the community? Is it something the child actually wants to do or needs to do? And have you considered their interests and their preferences in planning for your goals? I think it's very unfortunate and quite sad that those things are often overlooked as soon as there's a disability or a diagnosis. Sometimes forgetting that this is a human being with their own personality and their own interests, so much more than just a label or a diagnosis. So if you pull all these things together, you'll do a wonderful job with your goal selection. So I've chatted, or I've at least said, neurodiversity affirming model, but what does this actually mean? So when I first entered the field about 20 something years ago, the goal of something like ABA therapy was really to make kids indistinguishable from their neurotypical peers, to no longer look autistic. So things like stimming, like a hand flapping or vocalizations, were viewed as very stigmatizing and something that we need to extinguish. So there certainly are still programs that exist that are like that. And to me, that would now be considered a red flag, something I would be looking to avoid. We have a lot more information about, if I take the stimming example, what the purpose of stimming is for an autistic learner. It can be a means of regulation. They could be overstimulated in an environment and trying to do something familiar to regulate themselves. They could be understimulated and trying to give themselves some stimulation to get engaged. They know what their body needs. And I view it as unethical for us to jump in and, as an outside force, decide for them what their body needs. So, stimming absolutely serves a purpose. Within a neurodiversity affirming model, that's how we're viewing it. The brain is different, and we're going to try to understand that, and support where support is needed, not try to fix, or make a learner look neurotypical. Our goal is really just to help them, again, be as comfortable as they can be in a world in which their brain was not designed for. The neurotypical world is quite overwhelming and quite stressful for a neurodivergent individual. If you think about all the additional stressors that potentially happen for that child from the second they wake up in the morning, if their pajamas feel extra scratchy or a certain way, or the sock didn't go quite right, the favorite breakfast wasn't available, for our kids who really kind of thrive on that routine and that structure, it, the world can't be planned for in that way. So things are always going to be popping up that a lot of people may brush off as no big deal, which but could feel like a very, very big deal for a neurodivergent individual. So we're not looking to teach kids to make themselves look a certain way or suppress things. We don't want to contribute to higher levels of stress, burnout, anxiety, or decreased self-esteem. We do want to support safety, well-being, mental health, meaningful relationships, things that are going to lead to a more fulfilling life. Again, safety, comfort, the ability to communicate wants and needs and build those relationships. So when we're looking at the neurodiversity affirming model, really outcomes we're striving for here of certainly are the skill building. We want to see progress, we want to see gains, but that skill building is going to be generalizable, meaning that it's going to show up in the places that it needs to show up, and it's going to serve a purpose and be very meaningful for that learner. We're also teaching and supporting them from a place of respect and a place of trust, building those healthy, trusting relationships, which leads to greater engagement and then more sustainable skill use across settings. So what this really looks like to bring it all together is we're respecting differences. We're looking to understand that. Stimming, scripting, the use of AAC, so whether they sign or they use pictures or they write or type or use a speech generating device, all of that is very valid. We're focusing on cooperation and connection over compliance. And we're making sure that our goals are aligned again with skills that are functional, meaningful, relevant, valuable to that learner, not just more convenient for the adults in their lives. And we're coming from a place of support and skill building rather than a focus on having them suppress who they are as a neurodivergent individual. I will leave you with some closing points here, and then I look forward to taking questions if you have any. In the past, many social skills programs were really focused on conformity. The goal of these programs was to make neurodivergent children look like their neurotypical peers, and that would be the measure of success. They don't look autistic anymore. This intervention, this program was a great success. But we couldn't always see the impact that that was having internally and long-term mental health. This often came at the expense of the child's well-being. So as we have learned more, again, we still want to focus on skill building and support and making meaningful changes. But a neurodiversity affirming model is viewing all of this through the lens of a goal of reducing barriers so that all of our learners have access to meaningful social connections in ways that are authentic to them. So we are not focusing on fixing or highlighting specifically certain deficits. We're coming in and seeing where support is needed, and we're providing that support in a compassionate, ethical, human first way. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions. The first question is, what strategies can be used to help neurodivergent children build meaningful peer relationships without masking? That's a very difficult one. I think it starts with the environment that you cultivate. You cultivate an environment of trust, respect, acceptance, and belonging. We're not pinpointing things that are encouraging them to stand out. We're also helping our learners to connect with peers who have similar interests. I have many teens, for example, that come in and like things like Mickey or Thomas the Train. And others of their lives may view that as babyish or not age appropriate. But it's so wonderful when that teen finds a teen peer who also shares that interest. So I really think it comes down to, again, the environment that you're cultivating, that acceptance, that belonging, and helping them to make connections with others who accept them and cultivate a sense of belonging. Thank you for your time.